So sometimes you're asked to animate statements, not just like a title, but a statement. And this can be a very powerful thing when you don't have footage. So we're going to talk about building by words an animation and sort of moving it all together using nulls. Now I'm going to go in and create a new comp, and I am going to call this sentence words. Clever. 1920, 1080, 24 frames, all that's good. 10 seconds more than enough time. Black background's totally fine. We could save a step by doing a white background, but it's so fast to be able to make a solid. So I'm just going to go layer, new, solid, and I'm going to go, I don't want yellow, I want white. And white solid is the default name, which works fine. So we're good, right? So it's always helpful when you start making one of these to build the full graphic page and then make copies and eliminate words. To me, that's a lot faster. So I want to create a new layer, new text. My font is set to huge, so I'm going to scale it down to something more manageable, and I'm going to pick a different font. All right, so we're going to pick something clean, so I'm just going with simple Arial, and I'm going to do my typing. Let's do all caps. Describe Webster in 3 words. All right, so obviously these are overlapping. I'm going to have to make some adjustments. In order to make these separate, I need to do some spacing adjustments. So I'm going to go here, and it's this little icon here, and I was able to space these out a little bit. I can also, of course, align these centered on the page, centered as best I can. So going back to the character controls, the next thing I'm going to want to mess with is the tracking for each of these. So one of these words is going to be my primary word, and I would say it's probably describe. It looks like it's the widest word. All right, so then I'm going to go to Webster, and I can actually do a little bit of this as well. I can adjust the spacing in between the tracking and get it to match the word above, and it's already pretty close. Now, if I go to the next line, I probably have to make a bigger adjustment. So it's, again, right here. This is your tracking controls. You can get it pretty close. Now, the last one's going to be more of a challenge, right? Because it's just one word. It's clearly not going to be as wide unless I exaggerate it. But again, you can get into the tracking and you can expand things to where they finally are all the same width. So not terrible, not a great design, but enough to get the job done. All right, so this is our main title that we have happening over our white background. We're going to worry about it moving later. What we need right now is for all of these words to come in and land where they're supposed to land. So I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to do a separate layer for each word. So the first, I'm going to keep the bottom as a reference, just like we have in other exercises, and I'm going to go Command D for describe Webster in 3 words. All right, so the bottom one I'm going to leave alone. I'm going to hit return on this. I'm going to take away everything but describe so I can see that that's what it is. And I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to do the same thing, except now it's Webster. So I'm going to eliminate everything but Webster. And this one, I'm going to do in, and then this one is 3. And the last one is words. All right, so the first one's there as a reference. We might want to change the color of it just so it's a little easier to see. So I'm going to click into that first version. I'm going to select everything. And instead of pink, I'm going to go with a green or something that's going to stand out as kind of gross. And then if I turn off these other layers above it, we should eventually just get to our green only layer. Now the first layer is just going to be describe. So I'm going to turn on that layer. I'm going to make sure I'm on the describe layer. I'm going to make sure I'm on the title tool. And then I'm going to click in and I'm going to just get rid of everything but describe. And the next layer, I'm going to get rid of everything but Webster. But I have to turn on the layer or else it won't let me highlight it correctly. So I'm going to delete everything except for Webster. So I'm going to nuke those. So I'm going to nuke everything before this, and then of course it wraps around, so I have to return it to get it back down into position. So now in, so I'm going to take my title tool, and I'm going to delete everything after in, and everything before in. And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because I have to try to get this back in the same basic position, and that works pretty well. I can always do tracking, individual tracking layers if I have to. And then there's 3, which I need to turn on. We're going to go everything before 3, everything after 3, and then we're going to return. Looks like I have 1 letter too many, right? And then we're going to go over to 3, and we're going to spacebar it back into position. And again, if it's off too much, you can do the tracking controls just using the option and the arrow keys. All right, and the last one is words. This one should line up pretty easily because we're just going to nuke everything and then return, and it'll fall back down. All right, so that in layer is off by a little bit and it's kind of bothering me. So I'm going to play with the tracking, get it closer to right. That's pretty good. Now, again, I don't need my green layer anymore. I just want to make sure that everything was cool. If you look at what I originally did, everything sort of came up from the bottom and then eventually whooshes out of the way. And they kind of ripple in. Even the in 3 kind of comes up smoothly, which is kind of nice. So we need to move those ours is that way as well. So I'm going to go to describe, and I am going to go to the position controls for each of these words. So I'm actually going to just go ahead and open position for all of these so that I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to select all the layers. I held down Shift and selected them all. Hit P for position. So now that I have position up on every layer, I'm going to say, all right, I want these to animate over about a second. So I'm going to go 1 second in, and I'm going to set a sort of home position for all of these words. So I just hit the stopwatch for all of them. Then I'm going to go to the beginning, and I'm going to set a manual keyframe for each of these layers. And I'm going to go to the first word, describe, and I'm going to take it down and out of frame. And then I'm going to go to Webster, and I'm going to go to the Y position. I'm going to take it down and out of frame. Then I'm going to go to in. I'm going to take its Y down and out of frame. And then I'm going to take 3's position and go down and out of frame. And then I'm going to go to words and go down and out of frame. And now everything will come up all at once. It's a little jumbled, but at least I know the pacing that everything falls is about right. Now, the next thing is, it would be nice if these were a little faster. So I'd move them over a second. That's probably too long. So if I cut it back and I align them to about a half a second, things will probably feel a little snappier. All right, and there they all come up. Pretty cool. The only thing is, I want them staggered, right? I want a little more drama to that. So I'm going to actually deliberately throw them off just a little bit so that everything sort of comes up smooth. Here we go. And now, when I play it, they all come up a lot smoother. I'm going to mark off my area with the letter N for end, and now it's only a 3-second loop, and it should be a lot smoother. All right, pretty good. Now, I put motion blur on my other piece, on the example one. So I'm going to turn motion blur here on for the whole project. And then I'm going to go to where I have a checkbox for motion blur for each of these layers. So I'm going to go down to the toggle switches and modes, and I'm going to click it. And then I'm going to find the little motion blur, which is multiple circles here. And I'm going to click, 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 click on all of them. And that should give me the movement I want. And again, it'll render the first time I play it, but everything has a little bit of blur to it as it moves, which is kind of nice. Now the last thing we want is to push this whole image in. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to the layer menu, I'm going to go new, and I'm going to get a null object. And that null object is going to push the entire time that this is animating on. So I'm actually going to create, I'm going to go into the controls for that null area, and I'm going to go into the scaling, and I'm going to say, let's go from like 80% scale. I actually can set the first keyframe using the stopwatch. And then at the end of my animation, I'm going to manually set another keyframe, and this one is actually just at 100%. All right, and now I can't see anything move until I actually attach all these items to the null object. So I'm going to go to the little curly Q things, and I'm going to draw a line from each of them to the curly Q for the null, and it will display that you are now sort of married to the null. And once I've done that, it should all move towards me as it's building, which is pretty cool. Now, if I want it to fly off in a dramatic way, I can go to just the null. I don't have to adjust anything else. I can go to the null, and I can say, let's create a scaling keyframe here. Let's make this actually our 100% keyframe. It was at 96 point something. I'm going to do 100. And then when we go to the last keyframe, which is down here, I want to do something ridiculous. And I'm going to do like 3,000, and it's gone. And now, when I play it, it should take off at the end. So it's smoothing, smoothing, rendering, then it's going to take off. Let's watch it. Here we go. Really fast. Really, really fast. Maybe that's too much. I'm going to enter 2,500%. And then I'm going to hit play. And I'm going to let it take off. As it renders, then it'll loop back. And there's 2,500%. Boom, and it's gone. And that is how you can build a sentence in a dynamic way fairly quickly and use a null to make all the dynamic stuff happen after you build the sentence.